Hi, everybody. This is Rachel, and I just wanted to come talk today about social class and identity from Chapter 11. So first, to start with, I wanted to just define what social class is, so you know exactly what social class is when we talk about this. So according to Yeski, social class is defined as a large group of people who share a similar economic or social position in society, and it's based on their income, their wealth, their ownership of property, their job status, any sort of education or skills that they have, or power in the economic and political sphere. And so I do also want to mention with social class is that what's important to keep in mind is that social class is socially constructed. It's fluid. It doesn't always stay constant. And so we just kind of keep that in mind as we talk about social class, that it is something that our society constructs. And so that's just important to remember. So how is it that social class impacts college students? Well, there's actually really no specific theories regarding social class in relation to identity development among college students. At least as of the publication of our textbook, there really has not been a specific theory related to identity development in college students. But social class definitely does impact college students. It impacts them in several ways. It impacts their access to college, what college they do attend, which college is affordable for them, their readiness for college, and then even things like standardized test scores. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about the impact that social class has on students. I also wanted just to kind of mention too that students that come from low income or working class backgrounds do kind of bring with them a set of values, a set of norms that they carry with them. And a lot of times those values and norms don't always exactly align with the norms and values we see within higher education. And so that it becomes a struggle for them. So when they come in with these set of norms and values, and it's not exactly the norms and values that higher education expects, that can kind of create some problems. And those students that come from those middle class, upper class, affluent backgrounds, their norms and values do tend to align nicely with some of those expectations of higher education. And so they're often rewarded for that. And so their experiences will sometimes go a lot more smoothly because they don't face some of those, that alignment, aligns really nicely, and they don't face some of those issues. And so the social class does influence not only their access to college, but also the likelihood that they're going to thrive and succeed within college. I also want to talk about just some different types of differences in social class. So first generation, low income, working class students. Just to clarify what first generation students are, those are students who have parents that do not have a college degree. So they may have had some college, but they do not have a college degree. And also important to keep in mind too is that not all first generation students are poor or working class. Sometimes people kind of automatically assume that if they're a first generation student, then they're from a low income family. And that's not always true. We do see that more, but that's not always true. But what we do see is those that are from low income and are first generation students, sometimes we see kind of some trends. They typically have less information about college, so things like how to fill out a job application, how to apply for financial aid, something even like where to go buy their textbooks. That's hard for them to navigate because no one else in their family has done that. And they don't always not only have that role model to go by, but they don't always have a lot of support for going to college. And so that can kind of be a barrier for them. It's just, navigating the college system can be hard. And they often will have a limited finance to support that college education. It is a little bit harder for them to adjust to that culture of college, kind of like we talked about a little bit ago. And then we rarely see those first generation low income students attending selective institutions. On the other hand, middle class students, upper class, affluent students, these are students who typically possess more resources. They have a family member that has gone to college. they, have a parent, they have an older sibling that has been to college, so they're supportive of that decision. They know how to navigate the higher education system. They know about financial aid. They know about applications and, how to kind of navigate that system. And so they do have also more social support from their family members. And so they often are very unaware of what it's like for those with fewer resources to go through the college system. And so it's almost kind of, they're just oblivious to some of the struggles that can happen with someone who has family members that have never been to college, or, the financial aspect and support that some of the individuals from lower income deal with. Okay, so I do want to talk about two theories of social class. And I know I mentioned before that there's no specific theory on social class and identity development with college students, but there are two theories that we're going to look at that do talk about social class. And so we can kind of look at that in relation to education. So Bourdieu's theory of social reproduction talks about education, economics, cultural expectations that we have in our society, and how those perpetuate social class, how it perpetuates this inequality among the classes. And I do kind of want to point out that Bourdieu, his viewpoint is a sociological viewpoint, and more specifically, he does come from the conflict theory perspective. And so that kind of talks about how individuals that are wealthy, they own the means of production, the people that have all the resources, versus the people that are working for the people with the wealth, and how there is this inequality, and those that have the wealth and means of production will continue to have that, whereas those that don't, the working individuals, will continue to stay where they are. And so then the conflict theory just talks about some of these different areas in society that perpetuates this conflict of power. And so Bourdieu takes this perspective with a couple different areas, like I said, education, economics, cultural expectations. But if we look at that from this educational perspective, Bourdieu talks about how education, the K-12, the college setting, really reinforces and maintains this social structure and this social inequality that's already in place in our society, and how it just sort of continues to perpetuate this gap in inequality that we see. So I do have just a real short video that I think does a good job of explaining this. So we're going to watch that here real fast.
There remains a huge amount of social inequality between rich families and poor families. And one of the things that we know is that this large social inequality between the rich and families with much more resources and the poor elements of society seems to replicate itself across generations. So if we label this first group Generation 1 and the second group Generation 2, a large group of people who had rich parents tend to end up pretty wealthy themselves, and people who had poorer parents tend to end up poor. Now, this is actually a process that's called social reproduction. And what social reproduction means is that we are reproducing the social inequality across generations. And there must be reasons to help explain what's happening. One of the things that we see that wealthy families have is all these dollars here. They have a lot of what's called financial capital. Now, the useful thing about financial capital, and capital suggests that when someone has it, they can invest in something and get some returns. The good thing about financial capital is you can invest it into other things. You can invest it and obtain what's called social capital. And essentially what social capital means is building up reliable, useful social networks. Networks of trustworthy, useful connections. And from those connections, you can really obtain opportunities and advantages in society. The other thing that financial capital can expose you to is something called cultural capital. And what cultural capital is talking about is a few different things. So, for example, if your parents are regularly exposing you to trips abroad and you may be learning foreign languages such as French, they may be taking you to movies, to the theater, you can have a fine appreciation of classical music, for example. You may know all the social nuances of the local golf club, know how to play polo, know how to do the things that many middle class and upper class children know how to do and have those experiences. You may also have cultural items within your house, such as paintings, portraits, and other cultural artifacts, and you may know a lot about them. Your parents will clue you in. And both those things, social capital and cultural capital, they're capital. So with this understanding, you may gain some rewards. And part of that reward is that these two processes, these two capitals, can actually turbocharge this social reproduction. Well, hold on a second. Well, even if someone's really poor, won't they have social capital? Well, they will certainly have social networks, and they will certainly have culture and cultural experiences, but I'm going to bring something else into this mix. And I'm going to bring something that you would think would help to break all of this up. I'm going to bring our educational system in. Because one of the things you could say to me is that, hold on, doesn't our educational system give the poor a chance to break out of poverty and the rich, well, they presumably get good education anyway, right? But doesn't it give a chance to kind of shake up the system, put everyone on an equal footing? Well, think about this. Does our educational system value the culture of people from the lower classes as much as the culture of the people who have got much more resources, may come from the higher classes or more privileged classes? For an example of this will be graffiti. If a child knows all about the graffiti in their local neighborhood, I'm not too sure our educational system would care as much about that as it would fine art. So what we may find is that educational system really doesn't value the culture and the social networks of the poorer population or the less advantaged population. But what it does is really values the cultural capital and social capital of the more wealthy people. So in fact, our educational system can be reinforcing this social stratification that we see here. Children of rich parents are more likely to be wealthy themselves, and the children of poorer parents are more likely to stay poor compared to their richer peers. So actually our educational system may be reinforcing social reproduction. Now, obviously, a lot of this may be controversial and people may argue against it, and there are a lot of different variations and other aspects to consider, but this is just a brief overview of social reproduction.
Okay, let's get back to our screen here. All right. Can't figure out how to make it. Okay, so that just is a little bit of an overview kind of Bourdieu's social reproduction theory. And, you know, I'm sure that you noticed that while it talked about kind of in general some of this theory, it looks at the broad perspective and it doesn't take into account individual differences and some things that can happen, you know, individually and how not everybody fits into that framework. Okay, so the second theory that we're going to talk about is Yoso's community cultural wealth theory. And she didn't completely discredit Bourdieu's theory, but she did have criticisms of this theory. And she brings about looking at some of the value of some of those individual differences that students bring in. But what her criticisms of Bourdieu's theory was that his theory focused on what students lacked and really was ignoring some of those strengths and values that students can bring with them from the working class, the low income, and that they can bring along with them as they enter college. She also criticized his theory because it did focus on white, middle class, upper class culture, and it really does fail to acknowledge the strengths that low income and students of color can bring with them into the education system. And so she believes that all forms of capital, you know, like social capital and cultural capital, can really be used to empower individual. And her theory takes on a strength strengths-based perspective. And she talks about 6 types of capital and how those can, really help a student as they come in, and it's something that can help them be successful in college. And so as I go through these, maybe kind of keep in mind just this perspective of college students and higher education, and how as we work with college students in higher education, how these may apply to a lot of the students that we work with. Okay, her 6-part cultural wealth model talks about aspirational capital, and that's capital where individuals are able to remain optimistic and hopeful even when they run into obstacles or challenges. So they really show a sense of resilience, really, with even some of these challenges that they face. Linguistic capital is talking about communication. So that could mean a student's ability to have, know more than one language, but it also can talk about types of communication. So that cultural ability to have storytelling and oral history, and how that linguistic capital is important too. Familial capital talks about knowledge and values that are gained through our family. So that could be your immediate family, but it could also be through extended family, and just, a lot of those values that we can get from our families. Social capital is talking about community resources, networks of people, and how that can really, having those networks of people can be very beneficial. So that could be talking about friends, it could be talking about teachers, it could be talking about mentors. So anybody that really comes alongside the student is supportive of them. And so it is like social support. So having other people alongside them and really supporting and allowing for those resources for that student. Navigational capital is a skill set that someone uses to navigate just different institutional settings. So, there's some people that are just really good at, no matter where you put them, they can navigate wherever they are. They have this ability to just handle different situations, different settings that you put them in. And so that is very beneficial to have that skill set. And the last one that Yoso talks about is resistant capital. And so that's knowledge and skills that someone might use to challenge inequality. So this is someone who can advocate for themselves. They have the knowledge and skills to be able to speak up. And so this is especially true for students from low income and students of color, that they are able to challenge this inequality that they see and experience. So Yoso's model is really helpful at looking at strengths of college students and kind of individually what they can bring with them, and how that may help them. But, a criticism of this might be that it doesn't always look at the big picture. It doesn't address some of the societal issues that we do see in our society, and how that some of these societal issues are perpetuating this social inequality. And so, it has its pros and cons for sure. The next thing I wanted to talk about is just some different research that's been done with students from low social class, and the book talked about a couple different areas, but I kind of just wanted to focus on engagement, involvement, and sense of belongingness for college students, and kind of that importance of that, especially with students from low social class. So the first part is there was 2 individuals that did studies, and they kind of both came up with some similar results. They found that students from lower class backgrounds were less likely to be involved in extracurricular activities. They tended to work more hours outside of college, so full-time, part-time. They just worked more hours than students from middle and upper class. And they did have lower GPAs than students with that higher class background. Another study from Pasquarelli talked about, or they looked at just first-generation students, but showed very similar results, in that those students tended to work a lot more hours. They tended to not be involved in as many extracurricular activities, and they also had lower GPAs than those students from the higher class backgrounds. And then that third study from Osgrove and Long found that social class background was strongly related to a student's sense of belonging, which in turn predict their social, their academic adjustment to college, and just the quality of experience that they had at college, and also their academic performance. So you can kind of see how it is important I think for college students in general to have that engagement and involvement and have that sense of belongingness in college, but it really seems to affect those students from the lower social class if they, don't have this sense of involvement or sense of belongingness in college. The last part here, I just want to talk about just some kind of final thoughts from this chapter is that when we talk about social class, really a lot of these other identities for college students really intersect with social class, especially when we talk about gender and race. Class and race are oftentimes paired together, but class does not equal race. And so that is really important to remember as we talk about this. And I know, a lot of you have in your chapters have talked about that, looking at the whole student and not just this one type of identity. And the same thing goes for social class. This is just one piece of the puzzle. It's just one aspect of a student's identity. It's an important part of their identity, but it is just one part. And social class definitely goes in with a lot of other different areas of identity development. The last kind of second part here is just that it is important also to keep in mind that a lot of the research that's been done on social class has been done predominantly with white students. And so while there have been some studies that have been done with students of color, there have not been nearly as many studies with students of colors as there have been with white students. And so that's important to keep in mind. And when I talk about students of color, I do hope you know that I'm not talking about just African American students. I'm also talking about Hispanics and Asian students and Native American students, really any student that is not white or Caucasian. That's what I mean when I say students of color. Okay, the last thing I have is just our case study, and I know that this is probably also uploaded onto Canvas, but just kind of an overview here about Lori. She is a first-generation student. She is has a low-income background. She is working. She's also taking a full course load, 18 credit hours, and she's really feeling a sense of disconnect with other students and is really struggling to balance work and school. And so just kind of in light of what I've just kind of gone over, see if you can just kind of apply and think about some of these theories and some of this research that's been done on social class and how that might apply to Lori's story. And so definitely feel free to refer to the handout that I have up on Canvas just to kind of refresh your memory as you respond to the discussion questions for this case study. All right, thanks everybody. I look forward to just hearing your thoughts on this case study and reading your discussion posts. Thanks.